What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the Dallas Mavericks, more in particular, Luka Doncic. And I know I've talked about Luka and the Mavericks a lot over the past couple of weeks. I'm sure many of your other favorite NBA YouTubers are doing that as well, but it's mainly because they've been by far the biggest storyline of this post-trade deadline season. I mean, they're 1-8 in their last 9 games. They're on the verge of missing out on the play-in tournament entirely because right now they're 1 game behind the Thunder, who, if they win one more and the Mavs lose one more game, take that spot. They solidify it. The Mavericks have a very slim shot of making the play-in tournament. There's rumors that they're going to be shutting down Luka Doncic, who is arguably a top 5 player in this league and will probably finish on All-NBA first team this year. They also traded for Kyrie Irving at the deadline, a move that was supposed to solidify their spot in the playoffs and maybe make them contenders, but instead has completely and drastically destroyed any hopes of competing for a title this season. Additionally, they went to the Western Conference Finals just last year, so there's a lot going on. This was supposed to be a year where the Mavericks built off of that previous success. Instead, it has been a complete and utter disaster. But all of that turmoil isn't what I'm here to talk about. Instead, I'm here to talk about Luka Doncic and the situation that he is in at the moment. Luka theoretically should be competing for MVPs. Maybe he could have already had a couple under his belt at this point. He should be competing for titles. He should be starting to solidify his spot as an all-time great in this league, which he has still plenty of time to do all of those things, and I think he will. But it's not happening when it should. Right now, he should be doing all of those things, but he isn't. Instead, his team is fighting tooth and nail to even make the play-in tournament. And even if they make it there, there's no guarantee they make the playoffs because they've been so bad since the deadline. And the craziest part about all of this is that somehow Luka is kind of responsible for the situation that they're in now, which I know sounds ridiculous, but let me explain. To begin, we need to take a quick look at Luka Doncic's career. Right now, he's having another phenomenal season. He's averaging 32.8 points per game, 8.7 rebounds, and 8.1 assists to go with 1.4 steals on 61.0 true shooting percentage as a 24-year-old. It's a monster year. We never see 24-year-olds that are this good right away. Like I said earlier, he's probably going to make All-NBA first team. His 4th consecutive. The only time he didn't make All-NBA first team was his rookie year. Players this young aren't supposed to be this good, and he came straight into the league being pretty dominant already. In fact, Luka's had one of the best beginnings to a career out of any player to ever enter the association. If you don't believe me, over his 5 seasons, Luka is averaging 27.6 points per game to go with 8.6 rebounds and 8.0 assists. If we take a look at that point per game average, stretch over the course of an entire career, that would be the 3rd highest career point per game average in NBA history, only behind Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan. And like I mentioned right from the get-go, it was pretty clear that Luka wasn't just going to be a great player, he was going to be a historically great player, because in his rookie season, he not only won Rookie of the Year, but he averaged a ridiculous 21.2 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, and 6 assists. In his sophomore year, he built off of this, averaging 28.8 points per game, a 7.6 point jump to go with 9.4 rebounds and 8.8 assists, very nearly a triple-double average in just his 2nd season. He would then jump up to once again having around 28 points per game the next year, and again the following season after that. Right from the beginning, he was one of the best scorers in the league, and by his sophomore season, he was averaging the 5th most points per game out of anybody in the league, in a time where offensive talent has never been greater. Also in this season, he led the Mavericks to the playoffs, where he would announce his presence to the world, taking the new Kawhi Leonard and Paul George Clippers, who were seen by many as championship favorites, to 6 games, including hitting a massive step-back 3-game winner that really put him on the map. Like I said, they would end up losing the series, but it established that Luka was not only great, but that he and the Mavericks were going to be a force for years to come. He followed this up by leading the Mavericks to a 5 seed the following season, once again to face off against the Los Angeles Clippers, because that's just his luck, and it was a series where he once again was dominant, averaging 35.7 points per game, 7.9 rebounds, and 10.3 dimes on 49% shooting from the field. They actually took a 3-2 lead over Los Angeles before Kawhi Leonard turned into a robot and completely eviscerated them. He then followed that up by leading the Mavericks to the Western Conference Finals last season, taking down the Utah Jazz, as well as the Phoenix Suns en route to getting there, and that Suns team went 64-18. It was the best record they had ever had, and they were considered by many, me included, as the prohibitive championship favorites going into the NBA playoffs. All in all, Luka might be having the single most impressive individual beginning to an NBA career in the history of the association, and I know that sounds a bit exaggerated, but what he's doing as a 24-year-old is basically unprecedented. In fact, fact, I think if he retired following the season, he would make the Hall of Fame. I mean, 4-time All-NBA first-teamer most likely following the season, multi-time All-Star, what he did over in the EuroLeague. Luka has an amazing resume, and I think really he might already be a Hall of Famer, never mind thinking about what he's going to continue to do down the line. Luka is already probably going to be one of the all-time greats. I think that pretty much goes without saying. But weirdly enough, this level of historic dominance might be exactly what has been the Mavericks' undoing. To figure out exactly why this is the case, let's quickly talk about team building in the NBA. There are three main ways that you can build your team. You can draft players, you can sign players, and you can trade for players. All of these are very important to building a championship squad, and we can tell when we look at the most recent champions. If we take a look at the Lakers, they built their team mainly by signing LeBron James and then trading for Anthony Davis. The Raptors won a title by building a team and then topping it off by trading for Kawhi Leonard and acquiring Marc Gasol at the deadline. But out of these things, I think drafting is the most important. We once again look back at the Lakers. The reason they were able to trade for Anthony Davis is because they drafted well. They brought in Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Josh Hart, all valuable pieces to the Pelicans in that deal. The Raptors drafted DeMar DeRozan, who was involved in the Kawhi Leonard trade. The Golden State Warriors, the most dominant dynasty of this modern NBA era, they drafted pretty much their entire main core of Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson. Now, obviously, they picked up some other pieces through other avenues, but those three guys have been there for all four of their rings, and all three of them are drafted guys. Building a team through the draft is basically a necessity in the NBA. You can make amazing trades and amazing signings, but if you don't draft well, there is a very slim, maybe even negative chance that you end up winning a ring. With all this in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at Dallas's rebuild, which began in 2017 when they missed the playoffs for the first time since 2013. They ended up getting the 9th overall pick and drafted Dennis Smith Jr. out of NC State. Now, he had a really solid rookie season. I was a big fan actually of what he did in that debut campaign, but he didn't end up becoming a franchise cornerstone, and he actually would get dealt the following year, which is all right. You're not going to hit on every pick, and the Mavericks made up for it by getting Luka Doncic despite having the 5th overall pick, because they were able to convince the Hawks to trade with them, giving Atlanta Trae Young as well as their 1st round pick the next year. Obviously, this trade paid immediate dividends, as Luka not only gave the Mavericks a franchise cornerstone to build around, but he gave them a generational talent, somebody that is going to go down in the history books as one of the best players of this new era of players. However, the trade would mean that the Mavericks wouldn't get their pick the following year. However, that ended up being only the 10th overall selection, which the Hawks used to select Cam Reddish, who's been a decent player over the course of his career. But if the Mavericks can get Luka Doncic for Trae Young and Cam Reddish, they're fine. I'm sure they would do that trade 10 times out of 10. And besides, there's always the chance to get another co-star for Luka Doncic in the following draft. Except that there wasn't, because Luka Doncic got too good too fast, and as we talked about earlier, he willed the Mavericks to the playoffs as the 7th seed where they would battle the Clippers, and this doesn't sound like a bad thing, getting into the playoffs and starting to work towards championship contention, except ultimately, this was absolutely detrimental to the Mavericks' future. This is the Luka Doncic problem. Rather than spending a couple years in the lottery to get Luka that high-level pick with a top draft selection, the Mavericks, right from the get-go, were a playoff team following that first rookie season. By year 2, Luka was being talked about as a future MVP candidate, and they were in the playoffs. Most teams, it takes a couple of years through a rebuild. You get one guy, he's not immediately going to will you to the playoffs, so you get a second guy, and then maybe even a third guy, and you build a team that way. A good example are the Memphis Grizzlies, who right now are one of the best teams in the Western Conference because they got Jaren Jackson Jr. the first year of their rebuild. He wasn't too good, so they once again had a top pick, which ended up being number 2 overall, and they got Ja Morant, and the two of them are their 2 All-Stars. They even got Desmond Bane with the 30th overall selection, which is a whole nother thing, just a lesson on drafting well, which the Grizzlies always seem to do, but they got their 2 core All-Star guys by being bad like that 2 years in a row. If Luka hadn't been so good immediately, maybe the Mavs have a chance to get him that All-Star caliber talent way before they even have to try trading for Kyrie this season, who is the first All-Star Luka has ever played with, because the Mavericks had no chance to draft somebody alongside him. The second he got to Dallas, immediately they were a playoff team. This immediate dominance also led to Dallas almost seeming pressured to have to put some talent around Luka right away. They saw what happened with LeBron James in Cleveland, where he never really got much help, and they said, okay, we're not going to have that happen. We're going to try and put another young star next to Luka through a trade, and they dealt for Kristaps Porzingis, who had been an all-star earlier on in his career, but at the moment was dealing with a pretty significant ACL injury, which had kept him out of the entirety of the 2020 campaign, the end of which is when they traded for him. So he didn't play, as Luka ended up willing the Mavericks to the playoffs in 2020, but he was ready to go the following season. However, after this injury, he never regained his all-star form until kind of this year, where he's been really sneakily good on the Washington Wizards, but in Dallas he was never quite as good. He was highly inconsistent, he didn't seem to fit well as that secondary star, and also he continued to deal with injury issues, which kept him off the court for any sustained period of time. To acquire KP, the Mavericks gave up DeAndre Jordan, Wesley Matthews, Dennis Smith Jr., their 2021 first-round pick, and their 2023 first-round pick, top 10 protected. With that 2021 pick, the Knicks ended up getting Quentin Grimes, who's been integral to their success this season. And that 2023 pick could end up being very valuable because, as we've talked about throughout this video, and I'm sure you're aware, the Mavericks are on the verge of missing the playoffs, and right now they're teetering on that spot of maybe having that top 10 pick or even 11, depending on if a team jumps in the lottery. There's a real chance that the Mavericks could still get a lottery pick, but it goes to the Knicks because of that deal. After giving up on the Porzingis experiment last trade deadline, dealing him over to the Wizards, the Mavericks then tried again to get Luka a star at this deadline, going for Kyrie Irving while giving up Dorian Finney-Smith, a 2029 top 5 protected first-round pick, and Spencer Dinwiddie. As I mentioned in my previous few videos about the Mavericks, I was someone who thought this trade could work, but only if Dallas put more defenders around this backcourt duo that isn't exactly stopping anybody on the perimeter. However, they made no effort to do that at the deadline, and so it's been a complete disaster. There's still a chance it could work out if they had a good offseason and they bring Kyrie back, but for right now, it hasn't exactly paid dividends. So while things haven't worked out for the Mavericks in terms of making these big name deals, they aren't inherently bad. As we talked about earlier, many squads have to trade for that final piece in addition to their homegrown core to ultimately get over the hump and win a title. Dallas tried to do so by bringing Kristaps and now Kyrie Irving, but I feel like both of those deals were kind of short-sighted. They were thinking, okay, right now we need to go ahead and make a move to add a star player next to Luka, rather than taking their time evaluating their options and waiting for the perfect player to become available. And even if the Kristaps trade did work out, or the Kyrie one did, and they made the playoffs multiple years and were one of the top teams in the West, I don't know if they were ever going to truly get over the hump without a third guy, as most teams really need in the modern NBA. You think about recent teams like the Warriors with Steph, Clay, and Draymond. You think about the Bucks, who had Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Raptors had Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Pascal Siakam, even Fred VanVleet. Probably the only team in recent history that didn't have 3 stars at least were the Los Angeles Lakers, and they had LeBron James and Anthony Davis, who were both top 5 guys. The Mavericks haven't managed to put together multiple stars because they're rushing trades like the KP one and the Kyrie one, as well as the fact that, once again, they never got the chance to draft high-level players to include in a high-level deal. Like we mentioned once again with the Lakers being able to trade for Anthony Davis because they spent a couple of years in the gutter getting Lonzo Ball, getting Brandon Ingram, getting Josh Hart, who are intriguing pieces enough for the Pelicans to pull the trigger, giving up on Anthony Davis, who had been the star of their franchise for years. If the Mavericks had gotten high-level players, maybe they could have made some type of deal if they didn't work out as a co-star next to Luka, but once again, Luka just got too good, so they never got those young pieces to put in deals. Funnily enough, the best co-star that Luka probably had outside of Kyrie now was Jalen Brunson last year, and they ended up letting him walk, which was a disastrous decision. If they had just offered him a large extension earlier on in the season and refused to let him enter that free agency, there's a real chance they could have held on to him, and the core of Luka and Brunson, which led them to the Western Conference Finals last year, would probably still be intact, and who knows, maybe they would once again be one of the top teams in the West. So, well, yeah, weirdly enough, it is partially Luka's fault that the Mavericks are in this position. The front office has also done Luka no favors, consistently making some pretty bad decisions. His situation actually reminds me a lot of LeBron's when he was first drafted to Cleveland back in 2003. They're both incredibly gifted generational type talents that have the chance to compete for MVPs and championships pretty much at day one, but because they get too good, they're never able to get that all-star co-star in a draft. LeBron spent years on Cleveland never having real help outside of a couple of smaller deals that the Cavs made, but they never really built a championship caliber team around him. He willed the team to a finals at one point and a couple deep playoff runs, but they never gave him enough to end up getting over the hump. So eventually, he left to Miami, a team that did do exactly that, got him enough help, and eventually, of course, he returned to Cleveland, where he won with Kyrie and Kevin Love, but it didn't work out in his first stint. And maybe this is what ends up happening with Luka. He's unable to get over the hump in Dallas, so he ends up going somewhere else. Maybe he someday comes back a la LeBron, or he just stays away forever because he decides, I'm in a good spot. I can win in the new place that I went to. And I'm sure Dallas fans don't want to hear this. If I was a Mavericks fan, I would be terrified of this possibility, and I'm sure the front office is as well, which probably does explain the Kyrie trade. In fact, rumors are that Luka really pushed for this Kyrie trade as well as Jason Kidd because they wanted the success. They got that taste of the Western Conference Finals, of a deep playoff run, and they decided we need to do whatever we can at this deadline to try and get back to that spot, even if Kyrie theoretically wasn't the best fit in the backcourt next to Luka as his secondary star. Now, it may seem a bit premature to talk about Luka leaving Dallas because he still does have 3 years on his contract as well as a player option, although I'd be stunned if he turned that down because he's going to get like a $300 million max contract with however high the cap is at that point. But 3 years moves really fast in the NBA, and these things build up over time. It's not just like one day Luka decides, okay, I want to leave the Mavericks. The next couple years could be a real opportunity for the Mavericks to stop any chance of Luka leaving and deter any thoughts out of his mind. However, if next year they're disappointing again, maybe Kyrie leaves, they're once again without a co-star next to Luka Doncic. He's trying to will this team as far as he can, but they can't make the playoffs, or even if they do, they're not championship contenders. He might start to think about other players that he wants to team up with, and maybe not in Dallas, because he might come to the conclusion that I don't know if the Mavericks are going to be able to build this championship team around me. I just don't know if I trust this front office. I've only got so long in my career, and I guarantee every single team is going to try and make some type of pitch for Luka to come join them. So ultimately, Dallas is in a really tight spot. I know once again that 3 years feels like a lot, but in the NBA, that's a nanosecond. But ultimately, nobody can predict the future for the NBA. It is incredibly unpredictable. We don't know what players are going to be in what spots pretty much year to year, never mind in a few seasons. Maybe next year, the Mavericks are able to prove everybody wrong and build a championship squad around Luka and Kyrie Irving, and all of a sudden, Luka is once again competing for MVPs and titles like many of us hoped he would over the past few years. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe they crash and burn like many people think. Regardless, this is one of the most important off seasons in franchise history, and we'll see if they have what it takes to make the moves that they have to put Luka in the best spot possible, even if his dominance didn't exactly do them any favors early on. With all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. I think this was a bit longer. I've been recording for like 50 minutes now, so we'll see how long the video actually turns out. But if you made it to the end, I really appreciate it. It means a lot. Also, y'all support on this channel has been ridiculous recently. I want to thank you so much for everyone who has liked, commented, viewed a single second of these videos. It means the world. I'm going to continue having great content coming out for y'all, including the playoffs coming up. We're going to have prediction videos. We're going to have individual series videos where I break down exactly what I'm thinking about a particular matchup. So when the playoffs roll around, if you have any particular playoff series that you want to see me break down, make sure to let me know as always. But as always, I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.